Amid the chaos of a burning valley, Corporal Elise Hart crouched in the mud, her rifle steady despite the thunder of artillery. The men behind her whispered, doubting her every move. "You? A sniper?" They sneered until the night fell silent, and one impossible shot echoed through the hills. The target, an enemy commander 2 kilometers away, fell without a sound. As the smoke cleared, even her harshest critics stared in awe. She didn't speak. She just adjusted her scope and whispered, "Next target." That's when they realized the Phantom Lynx wasn't just a name. It was a legend being born. The valley had been burning for 3 days. Corporal Elise Hart pressed her body flat against the frozen earth, feeling the percussion of distant artillery through her ribcage. Each explosion sent tremors through the mountainside, dislodging small cascades of dirt that pattered against her helmet. The air tasted of cordite and ash. Charlie Company was pinned down in a god-forsaken stretch of contested territory along the northern border, a maze of pine forests and granite ridges where visibility shifted with every gust of wind. Command had promised air support 48 hours ago. The sky remained empty except for smoke. "Hart, you getting anything up there?" Lieutenant Davis's voice crackled through her earpiece, tension making his words sharp. Elise adjusted the focus on her scope, scanning the tree line 800 meters out. Nothing. Just shadows and the occasional flutter of disturbed branches. Negative. No movement. Behind her position, tucked into a hasty fighting hole, Sergeant Bowman muttered something to Private Chen. She caught the tail end, sending a girl to do recon. Might as well wave a white flag. Chen laughed, a quick, nervous sound that died fast. Elise had heard worse. The infantry school instructors who'd told her she'd wash out before week 3. The male recruits who'd sabotaged her gear during field exercises. The captain back at base who'd asked, with genuine confusion, why she didn't just take a nice logistics posting instead. She'd smiled politely every time, then outscored them all on the range. But that was controlled conditions, paper targets, measured distances. This was different. This was 83 soldiers counting on her eyes, her calculations, her steady hand. The weight of it pressed harder than any pack she'd humped up these mountains. "Contact, northeast sector," she reported, her voice flat and professional. 4 hostiles. Moving through the pines at your 11 o'clock, range 900 meters. You sure about that? Bowman's skepticism bled through the radio static. Elise watched the figures move between the trees, reading their formation, their purposeful gait. Affirmative. Looks like a patrol. They haven't spotted us yet. Hold fire, Davis ordered. We don't need to give away our position unless... The crack of gunfire cut him off. Someone in 3rd Squad had panicked, squeezed off a burst that went wild and high. The enemy patrol scattered instantly, trained reflexes sending them diving for cover. God damn it. Davis's curse echoed across the company channel. Elise tracked one hostile as he sprinted toward a cluster of boulders. She led the target slightly, accounting for his speed and the crosswind that tugged at her rifle. Her finger rested beside the trigger guard, not on it, not yet. She needed authorization. That was the rule. "Hart, can you drop him?" Davis asked. "Yes, sir." "Then take the shot." She shifted her breathing, letting her heart rate settle. The fundamentals came back like muscle memory. Natural point of aim, stock weld, sight picture. The world narrowed to the small circle of her scope. The running figure slowed for a fraction of a second as he prepared to leap the last few meters to cover. Elise squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the hostile stumble mid-stride, then collapse behind the boulder. She couldn't tell if she'd hit him or if he'd made it to cover. "Possible hit," she reported. "Target down or concealed." Silence on the radio, long enough that she wondered if her transmission had cut out. Then Bowman's voice, grudging. "I saw him go down. Nice shot, Hart." It wasn't praise. It was surprise. Elise chambered another round and kept scanning. The remaining hostiles had vanished into the forest. Smart. They'd be reporting this position back to their commanders within minutes. Charlie Company needed to relocate before mortars started raining down. But for now, in this brief moment of quiet, she allowed herself one small satisfaction. She'd done her job. One shot, one hit. That was all she'd ever asked for the chance to prove she belonged here. In the dying light, frost began forming on her rifle's barrel. She wiped it away with a gloved hand and settled in for a long night of watching shadows move between the trees. The relocation happened under cover of darkness, the company moving in staggered columns through the mountain passes. By dawn, they dug in on a new ridge with better sightlines but worse protection from the wind. Elise set up her position behind a fallen log, using pine branches to break up her silhouette. The morning patrol report came in terse and bad. Enemy forces had probed their old position twice during the night. They were being hunted. "We need to identify their forward observers," Lieutenant Davis said during the briefing, his breath fogging in the cold air. "They're calling inaccurate fire. Someone's watching us." "Hart can find them," offered Private Thompson, one of the younger soldiers who'd joined them from a replacement battalion. He had the kind of optimism that combat hadn't beaten out yet. Sergeant Bowman shook his head. "We need a real sniper team for that. No offense, Hart, but spotting for fire missions isn't the same as counter-sniper work." "I've trained for it," Elise said quietly. "Training isn't the same as doing." She didn't argue. There was no point. In the military, you proved yourself through action, not words. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly. The attack came at 0900 hours. Mortars first, the distinctive crump of tubes firing, then the whistle of shells arcing overhead. Everyone dove for cover. Explosions walked across the hillside, throwing up geysers of frozen earth. In the chaos, Elise spotted muzzle flashes from an outcropping about 1,200 meters distant. "Contact. Enemy position, bearing 045, she shouted into her radio. "Can you suppress them?" Davis demanded. "Attempting." She sighted in on the outcropping, trying to catch glimpses of the enemy between the smoke and dust. There a figure moving behind a ridge. She fired, worked the bolt, fired again. The figure disappeared. "Target obscured," she reported. "Heavy dust. Can't confirm." A round cracked past her head, so close she felt the pressure wave. Instinct threw her sideways. She hit the ground hard, her rifle clattering against rock. When she looked up, Bowman was staring at her from his own fighting position 10 meters away. "You gave away your position," he said flatly. Muzzle flash. "Every time you shoot, you're a target." He was right. She'd been focused on engaging the enemy, not on concealment. A fundamental error. Her instructors would have failed her on the spot for that mistake. She started. "Save it." Bowman turned away. "Chen, get on that M240 and give them something to think about." The machine gun opened up with its distinctive roar. Long bursts that forced the enemy to keep their heads down. Under that covering fire, the mortar barrage tapered off. The enemy was repositioning, probing for weakness. Elise retrieved her rifle and checked it for damage. Everything intact, but her confidence had taken a hit. She'd made a rookie mistake under pressure, the kind of error that got people killed. As the adrenaline faded, she became aware of voices drifting across the position. Soldiers talking in that way men do when they think no one's listening. "Told you. Can't handle the pressure. Give her a break. She's still learning. This isn't a classroom. We're pinned down here and Davis puts a woman on Overwatch." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Not because they were cruel, but because part of her wondered if they were right. She'd spent 18 months training for this role, had scored expert on every qualification, had volunteered for this deployment specifically. But none of that mattered if she couldn't execute when lives depended on it. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Her final training exercise at Fort Benning. She'd been the only woman in her scout sniper class, enduring 8 weeks of brutal field problems and psychological pressure. During the culminating event, she'd held a hide position for 36 hours in freezing rain, then made a successful stalk and engagement on a target at 900 meters. Her instructor, a grizzled master sergeant named Kowalski, had signed off on her certification without a word of praise or criticism. Later, she'd overheard him in the cadre office. "She can shoot, but put her in a real firefight and we'll see if she's got the nerve." Now she was in that real firefight, and she'd flinched. Elise pressed her forehead against the cold metal of her rifle stock. "Get it together," she told herself. "One mistake doesn't define you. You've still got a job to do." She raised her head and resumed scanning through her scope, looking for targets, looking for threats, looking for a chance to prove to them, to herself, that she belonged on this ridge with these men. The enemy gave her that chance sooner than expected. Night operations were different. The world became a study in shades of darkness, broken only by the green phosphorescence of night vision optics and the occasional white flash of illumination rounds. Elise preferred it. Darkness was an equalizer. It mattered less whether you were male or female when no one could see you anyway. She'd volunteered for a solo reconnaissance patrol, pushing forward to identify enemy positions before the next attack. Lieutenant Davis had hesitated, glanced at Sergeant Bowman, then nodded. "Stay off the radio unless you've got something critical. You're exposed out there." Now she was 300 meters beyond the company perimeter, low crawling through a pine forest that smelled of sap and decay. Every movement was calculated, weight distributed across knees and elbows, rifle cradled close to her body, ears straining for any sound that didn't belong to the wind or the trees. The temperature had dropped below freezing. Ice crystals formed on the dead needles beneath her, creating tiny mirrors that caught what little light filtered through the canopy. She moved between them slowly, avoiding any disturbance that might give her away. Through her night vision monocular, the world appeared in grainy green clarity. She could make out individual tree trunks, the texture of bark, the small movements of nocturnal animals startled by her presence. What she was looking for were the movements that didn't belong, the ones with purpose and pattern. After 40 minutes of painstaking progress, she found them. The enemy had established an observation post on a small knoll overlooking the valley where Charlie Company was dug in. Professional work, camouflage netting strung between trees, minimal light discipline, sentries positioned to cover approaches. She counted at least 6 hostiles, possibly more inside the fortified position. This was the forward observation team calling in those mortar strikes. Eliminate them, and the company could maneuver without constant indirect fire harassing their movements. Elise keyed her radio, keeping her voice to a bare whisper. Outpost 1 to base. I have eyes on enemy OP. Grid November Victor 4738. Count CISO style. Prepared defensive position. Request strike authorization. The response came after a long pause. Outpost 1, confirm position. You're supposed to be reconnoitering, not making contact. Position confirmed. I have a clear shot on enemy radio operator. Range approximately 600 meters. Request permission to engage. Another pause. She could imagine the conversation happening back at the company command post. Davis and Bowman, debating whether to trust her judgment, whether the intelligence was worth revealing her position. Outpost 1, negative. Hold position and continue observing. Bowman is moving a fire team to your location for a coordinated assault. ETA 20 minutes. Elise bit back her frustration. 20 minutes was an eternity in tactical time. The enemy could relocate, reinforce, or simply fade into the night. This opportunity wouldn't last, but orders were orders. She settled into a concealed position behind a deadfall log, using her monocular to memorize every detail of the enemy post. She noted the placement of their fighting positions, the sectors of fire they'd established, the small details that would matter when friendly forces assaulted this position. 15 minutes passed. No sign of Bowman's team. Then movement caught her attention, a new figure approaching the observation post from the north. Through her optic, she watched the enemy radio operator stand up to greet the newcomer. They spoke briefly, then the newcomer pulled out what looked like a map case. An officer. Had to be. The body language was all wrong for an enlisted man, too much authority in the gestures, too much deference from the others. This changed everything. Officers meant intelligence value, orders, codes, strategic information. If Bowman's team hit this position hard and fast, they might capture someone worth interrogating, or the enemy might hear the assault team coming and bug out, taking their officer and their intelligence with them. Elise made a decision. She disengaged the safety on her rifle, verified her range estimation, and adjusted for the slight downhill angle. The officer was still standing in profile, presenting a clear target. One shot would drop him and throw the observation post into chaos, giving Bowman's team the opening they needed. But she didn't have authorization. Her finger rested on the trigger, pressure building. Every instinct told her to take the shot. Every regulation told her to wait for orders. In the end, training won out. She held fire, watching through her scope as the officer finished his briefing and disappeared back into the darkness. The opportunity evaporated with him. 5 minutes later, Sergeant Bowman materialized beside her position like a ghost, 4 soldiers fanning out to establish a perimeter. He looked at her, then at the enemy observation post ahead, then back at her. Good hide, he whispered. What have we got? She gave him a quick brief, detailing the enemy's strength and disposition. She didn't mention the officer. What was the point? He was gone now. Bowman studied the target through his own optics, then keyed his radio to coordinate with Lieutenant Davis. The decision came swiftly. Bypass the observation post, continue the reconnaissance, gather more information before committing to a fight. As they pulled back through the forest, moving in a tactical column, Private Chen fell in beside Elise. Good spot, he said quietly. Clean work getting in there without being detected. It was the first compliment she'd received from anyone in the platoon besides Thompson's earlier optimism. She nodded acknowledgement, unable to trust her voice. They made it back to friendly lines just before dawn, cold and exhausted but with valuable intelligence about enemy positions and movements. Lieutenant Davis reviewed her report and added it to the tactical picture they were building. But later, as she cleaned her rifle and tried to ignore the trembling in her hands, adrenaline crash, always hit worst after the danger passed, she kept replaying that moment in her mind. The officer standing exposed, the perfect shot she hadn't taken. Had she made the right call? Or had she let fear of disobeying orders rob the company of a critical target? She didn't know, and not knowing was worse than failure. The pattern established itself over the next week. Long periods of tense waiting, punctuated by sharp, violent exchanges of fire. Charlie Company was playing a deadly game of chess against an enemy force that matched them in skill and exceeded them in local knowledge. Every movement had to be calculated, every position carefully chosen. Elise fell into the rhythm of it. 2 hours on watch, 4 hours down, constantly ready to grab her rifle and respond to contact. She stopped noticing the cold, stopped caring about the inadequate rations, stopped wondering whether the soldiers around her respected her or merely tolerated her presence. What mattered was the job. Watch the sectors of fire, identify threats, engage targets when authorized. The rest was noise. It was during a routine morning observation that she spotted the pattern. Every day at approximately 0730 hours, a lone figure would appear at the edge of the enemy-controlled village in the valley below. He'd stand on a particular rooftop, sometimes holding binoculars, sometimes speaking into a radio. Always the same rooftop, always roughly the same time. Battalion intelligence had been trying to identify enemy leadership for days. Radio intercepts suggested a field commander operating in this sector. Someone competent enough to coordinate the complex operations that were slowly bleeding Charlie Company dry. Elise documented the pattern, noting times and behaviors, building a profile. On the 4th day, she brought it to Lieutenant Davis. "I think I've identified their forward commander," she said, laying out her observation logs. "Daily pattern, tactical oversight behaviors, radio communications. He's coordinating their movements from that rooftop." Davis studied her notes, then called over Sergeant Bowman and Staff Sergeant Crawford, the platoon sergeant from 2nd Platoon. They reviewed the information together, comparing it against their own intelligence reports. "Range?" Crawford asked. "Approximately 1,100 meters, Elise replied. "Variable wind, but I've been tracking the patterns. Morning thermal changes affect the trajectory, but it's a makeable shot." "Makeable for who?" Bowman said. There was no hostility in the question, just skepticism born of experience. "That's a tough shot even for trained counter-snipers. I can make it. On the range, maybe. But this is different. One shot, one chance. You miss, and he'll never show himself again. We'll have wasted our best opportunity to decapitate their command structure." The implication hung in the air. Maybe someone more experienced should take the shot. Davis looked at her carefully. "You confident, Corporal?" Elise considered the question seriously. Confidence wasn't the same as arrogance. She'd spent days studying this target, documenting environmental conditions, calculating every variable she could control. But there were always factors you couldn't control: a sudden gust of wind, a last-second movement by the target, equipment malfunction. "Sir, I've made this shot 100 times in training at similar ranges under various conditions. I understand the risks, but I believe I can do this." There was a long silence. She could see them weighing the options: trust the rookie female sniper, or bring in someone with more combat experience. The problem was that Charlie Company didn't have a dedicated sniper team. She was the closest thing they had to a precision marksman. "Set it up," Davis finally said. "But Crawford, I want you spotting for her. If anything looks wrong, call it off. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They moved to Elise's observation position before dawn the next morning, setting up behind the same deadfall log she'd been using. Crawford brought his spotting scope and a range card marked with wind indicators and elevation data. Together, they ran through the calculations one more time. "Target distance 1,127 meters, Crawford murmured, working the numbers. "Angle of fire -12 degrees. Current wind 3 to 5 miles per hour, quartering from the right. Temperature 34 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. How are you calling it?" Elise had already done the math. Elevation dial to 6.5 mils. Windage right 1.2 mils to account for the crosswind and the morning thermal rise. "I'll aim center mass to maximize probability of hit." Crawford grunted approval. "Solid. Remember, morning thermals are tricky. The sun's heating the valley floor. creating vertical wind currents we can't see. Be ready to adjust if your first spotter round shows drift. No spotter round, Staff Sergeant. One shot only. If I miss, he's gone. Confident, prepared, they waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The valley below began waking up, smoke rising from chimneys. Small movements of civilians going about their dangerous routines in a war zone. Elise tracked it all through her scope, maintaining her sight picture while staying relaxed enough to avoid muscle fatigue. At 0724 hours, a figure appeared on the rooftop. "Stand by," Crawford said softly. Confirming target. Matches description. Radio in hand. That's him. Elise's breathing settled into the rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and controlled. Her heart rate dropped. The rifle became an extension of her body, solid and steady despite the cold. The target moved to his usual position, raising the radio to his ear. Through her scope, she could see his face clearly weathered, focused, completely unaware that he was being observed from over a kilometer away. "Wind's picking up," Crawford warned. "Gust from the northeast, maybe 4 miles per hour." She adjusted slightly, accounting for the change. The reticle settled on the target's center mass, rising and falling gently with her breathing. She counted her heartbeats, timing the shot for the natural pause between beats when her body was most still. 3 heartbeats. 2. 1. She pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, the suppressor reducing the report to a sharp crack instead of a thunderous boom. Through the scope, she tracked the bullet's flight time, roughly 1.5 seconds at this range. The target remained standing, still talking on his radio. Then he jerked backward, the radio falling from his hand. He crumpled to the rooftop and didn't move. "Target down," Crawford confirmed, his voice tight with what might have been surprise or respect. "Clean hit. He's not getting up." Below, figures rushed toward the rooftop. Shouting carried across the distance, too faint to make out words but loud enough to convey panic and confusion. The enemy had just lost a commander, and they didn't even know where the shot had come from. Elise cycled the bolt, chambering a fresh round, and continued scanning for targets of opportunity. Her hands were steady. Her breathing remained controlled. "Command, this is Overwatch," Crawford reported on the radio. "Target eliminated. Confirmed kill on enemy commander. Position remains concealed." Lieutenant Davis's response came with audible relief. "Copy that, Overwatch. Excellent work. Hold position and continue observation." Crawford looked at her, his weathered face unreadable. "Hell of a shot, Hart." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Don't let it go to your head. You got lucky with the wind." But there was something different in his tone now, not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd done the job. Professional, clean, effective. As they packed up their position to relocate before enemy counter-snipers could identify their hide, Elise allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. She'd proven she could perform under pressure. She'd made the shot when it mattered. The whispers started that afternoon, spreading through Charlie Company with the speed of wildfire. The new kid, Hart, she dropped an enemy commander at over a click. One shot, no warning, clean kill. By evening, someone had started calling her Lynx for her ability to remain unseen and strike without warning. The nickname stuck. Elise didn't seek attention or glory, but she'd earned something more valuable: the beginning of respect. Lieutenant Colonel Mason arrived at Charlie Company's position 3 days after Elise's successful engagement. He came with an escort of staff officers and an air of barely contained irritation that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else than on this frozen hillside. Mason was old-school Army, a Mustang officer who'd started as an enlisted infantryman and worked his way up through decades of service. He had the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments and too many decisions where all the options were bad. He didn't believe in shortcuts, easy answers, or soldiers who hadn't paid their dues. Lieutenant Davis met him at the company command post, a dugout position reinforced with sandbags and camouflage netting. Elise was on watch 200 meters away when she heard her name over the radio. "Corporal Hart, report to the CP immediately." She turned her position over to Private Thompson and made her way down the hillside, wondering what she'd done wrong. In her experience, commanders didn't summon junior enlisted soldiers to command posts unless someone had screwed up. Mason was studying a map when she arrived, his fingers tracing the valley routes and enemy positions. He glanced up as she entered, giving her a quick assessment head to toe, the kind of look that took in everything from her bootlaces to the condition of her weapon. "You're Hart," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir. The one who dropped that commander at 1100 meters." Yes, sir. Lucky shot? Elise considered the question. She could play modest, downplay her skills, tell him what he probably wanted to hear, that she'd gotten fortunate with the conditions. But something in his eyes suggested he'd see through that immediately. No, sir. Calculated shot. I'd been observing the target for 4 days, documenting patterns and environmental conditions. When the opportunity presented itself, I took it. Mason grunted, still studying her. Lieutenant Davis tells me you've been volunteering for every risky patrol and recon mission. Why? That's what I'm trained for, sir. That's not what I asked. She met his gaze steadily. Because I'm good at it, sir. And because the company needs good reconnaissance to survive up here. Or because you're trying to prove something. Maybe both, sir. That got the hint of a smile, though it disappeared quickly. I'm putting together a direct action mission. Intelligence suggests the enemy is stockpiling supplies in a village 8 clicks north of here. Ammunition, medical supplies, possibly command and control equipment. Battalion wants it destroyed before they can move it. Yes, sir. It's a night infiltration through hostile territory. High risk, high reward. I'm taking a small team, experienced soldiers only. Davis recommended you as a possible addition. Mason's tone made it clear what he thought of that recommendation. I told him I don't take soldiers on combat missions based on one lucky shot. Elise said nothing. There was nothing to say. However, Mason continued, I'm willing to give you a chance to prove you belong. There's a ridge 3 clicks northeast of here. Enemy forces use it as a route for their supply convoys. I want you to conduct a reconnaissance patrol tonight, identify their movement patterns, and report back. Alone. It was a test. Obviously a test. Probably a test he expected her to fail. Understood, sir. What time do you want me to step off? 2,200 hours. You'll have 12 hours before dawn. If you're not back by first light, we're not coming to look for you. We can't risk exposing the company position for a solo patrol gone wrong. I'll be back before dawn, sir. Mason studied her for a long moment, then nodded dismissal. As she turned to leave, he added, Hart, I've been doing this for 26 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers who were tough in garrison fold under real pressure. And I've seen quiet ones surprise everyone. Don't know which you are yet. That's what tonight's about. Yes, sir. She saluted and left, feeling the weight of his scrutiny like a physical pressure between her shoulder blades. This wasn't just about reconnaissance. This was about whether she got invited to future missions, whether she earned a role beyond being the company's makeshift sniper. This was about proving she belonged in the fight. Elise stepped off at precisely 2,200 hours, moving through a gap in the defensive perimeter that Sergeant Bowman had quietly shown her. Stay smart out there, he'd said, the closest thing to encouragement she'd heard from him. The night was moonless and cold, temperature hovering just below freezing. Perfect conditions for movement. The darkness concealed her, and the cold kept most animals inactive, reducing false alarms. She'd painted her face with camouflage cream, darkened any reflective surfaces on her gear, and loaded her pack with the essentials: water, ammunition, medical supplies, navigation tools. The route took her through dense forest, following terrain features that provided natural concealment. She moved slowly, pausing frequently to listen and observe. Every 50 meters, she'd stop and conduct a full scan, 360 degrees of awareness, checking her back trail as carefully as her forward route. After 90 minutes, she reached the ridge Lieutenant Colonel Mason had indicated. From this elevation, she could observe the valley floor where enemy supply routes converged. She found a position between 2 large boulders that provided cover and concealment, then settled into watch. The night stretched out. Hours passed with minimal movement, occasional vehicle traffic on the distant road, a patrol passing well to her east, the normal rhythms of a nighttime war zone. She documented everything in her notebook, using a red lens penlight to maintain her night vision. At 0245 hours, she heard movement. Close, too close. She froze, controlling her breathing, straining to identify the source. Footsteps on rocky ground, multiple individuals, moving with tactical discipline. They were approaching her position from uphill, the one direction she'd thought was secured. Enemy patrol. Had to be. And they were walking right toward her. Elise had 3 options: stay hidden and hope they passed without detecting her, attempt to evade, or engage. The last option was worst-case scenario. Gunfire would reveal her position and bring down overwhelming response from enemy forces in the valley below. She chose the first option, pressing herself deeper into the shadows between the boulders, making herself as small and still as possible. Her rifle lay across her lap, safety off, finger resting outside the trigger guard. If they spotted her, she'd have maybe 2 seconds to respond. The patrol came into view, 6 fighters moving in a tactical column, weapons ready, scanning their sectors. Professional soldiers, not militia. They were executing a standard patrol pattern, clearing the ridge systematically. They were going to walk right past her position. The lead man passed within 5 meters, close enough that she could hear his breathing, see the condensation of his breath in the cold air. Her own breath, she held completely still, lungs starting to burn with the effort. If he looked right, straight into the shadows where she lay hidden, he'd see her. He didn't look. The patrol continued past, each man focused on his assigned sector, none looking into the dark gap between the boulders where she'd hidden herself. After they passed, she remained frozen for another 10 minutes, ensuring they weren't doubling back or leaving a trail element behind. When she was certain they were gone, she allowed herself to breathe normally again. Her heart was hammering, adrenaline flooding her system with the close call. That patrol hadn't been random, they'd been clearing this exact ridge, probably as part of a routine security sweep. She'd been lucky. If she'd set up in a more exposed position, if the lead man had been more observant, if the moon had been out to cast shadows differently, any of those factors could have resulted in her being compromised. The rest of the night passed without incident. At 0530 hours, with dawn approaching, she began her withdrawal back toward friendly lines. The return trip was slower, more cautious. The encounter with the enemy patrol had rattled her, made her second-guess every movement. She reached Charlie Company's perimeter at 0612 hours, just as the eastern sky was lightening to gray. Sergeant Bowman was waiting at the entry point, looking relieved to see her. "Welcome back, Lynx," he said quietly. "Mason's waiting for your report." Lieutenant Colonel Mason was in the command post, reviewing overnight radio traffic with Lieutenant Davis. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said. Elise gave her report concisely. Enemy traffic patterns, vehicle movements, tactical observations. She included the close encounter with the patrol, noting their professionalism and the systematic way they'd cleared the ridge. When she finished, Mason was silent for a moment, considering. Then, "You were compromised." "Almost compromised, sir. They passed without detecting me, because you got lucky, because I chose a good hide position and maintained discipline, sir." Mason's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or at least reconsideration. "The mission I'm planning requires that kind of discipline from every member of the team. We can't afford mistakes or panic. Lives depend on every person doing their job correctly." "Yes, sir. You did good work tonight, Hart. Be ready to move out at 1800 hours. Bring your rifle and enough ammunition for a sustained engagement. We're going after that supply depot." It took a moment for his words to register. He was including her in the mission. Not as a test, not as a provisional member, but as part of the team. "Yes, sir," she managed. "Don't make me regret this," Mason added as she turned to leave. "And don't get yourself killed. I hate writing letters to parents. I'll do my best, sir." Outside the command post, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. Elise felt exhaustion settling into her bones. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, but also a fierce satisfaction. She'd passed the test. Now came the real work. The assault team assembled as dusk fell. 8 soldiers, including Elise, Lieutenant Colonel Mason, Staff Sergeant Crawford, and 5 experienced infantry specialists chosen from across the battalion. They moved out in tactical column, each person spaced 10 meters apart, communicating through hand signals and whispered radio checks. The objective was a small village 8 kilometers north, officially abandoned, actually serving as an enemy logistics hub. Intelligence indicated minimal security forces, but everyone knew intelligence was often wrong in the worst possible ways. They moved through the night using terrain navigation, avoiding established trails and roads. Mason set a punishing pace, eating up the kilometers with the efficiency of soldiers who'd done this hundreds of times. Elise kept up, refusing to show any weakness or fatigue. Around midnight, they established an observation position overlooking the target village. Through their optics, they could see exactly what intelligence had promised. Vehicles parked in a central courtyard, supplies stacked under camouflage netting, and critically very light security. Maybe 6 guards visible, possibly more inside the buildings. Mason gathered the team for a final brief. "Crawford, you're taking 4 men to place demolition charges on the supply dump. 15 minutes to set the charges and get clear. Hart, you and Vasquez are providing overwatch from this position. Your job is to keep enemy heads down while the demo team works. Questions? None. Vasquez, you take the eastern sector. Hart, western approaches. You see hostile movement, you drop them quietly. We need to maintain surprise as long as possible. Roger that, sir, Elise confirmed. Corporal Vasquez nodded, already settling into position beside her with his designated marksman rifle. He was a lean, quiet Puerto Rican with a reputation for steady shooting and steadier nerves. The assault team moved out, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts. Elise adjusted her scope settings for low-light shooting and began scanning her assigned sector, looking for threats. For the first 10 minutes, nothing moved except wind through the empty buildings. Then she spotted a guard making his rounds on the eastern perimeter, walking with the bored, mechanical rhythm of someone who'd done the same patrol 1,000 times. Guard, eastern sector, range 400 meters, Vasquez whispered. Him, Elise confirmed. They let him walk his route. No threat to the demo team yet. But when he turned toward the courtyard where Crawford's team was working, Vasquez took the shot, a suppressed round that dropped the guard instantly, the sound no louder than a cough. Target down, Vasquez reported. Anyone else see that? Elise scanned the village. No reaction. The other guards hadn't noticed their comrade falling. Crawford's voice came over the radio, barely audible. Charges set. 2 minutes to extraction. Those 2 minutes stretched into eternity. Elise tracked 3 more guards moving through the village, none of them yet aware that anything was wrong. Her finger rested on the trigger, ready but not pressing. Vasquez had taken 1 shot. If she had to fire, the sound would carry even with the suppressor. Then one of the guards stopped, turned, seemed to notice the body of his fallen comrade. He called out a sharp, questioning shout that echoed across the empty village. Kontakt, Elise Priest. The guard raised his rifle, scanning the darkness. He was looking in the wrong direction, away from their position, but he'd seen enough to know something was wrong. In seconds, he'd raised the alarm. Elise made the decision instinctively. She centered her reticle on the guard's upper chest and fired. The bullet struck true, and he crumpled beside the first casualty. But the sound had carried. Shouting erupted from inside one of the buildings, confused, angry voices demanding answers. Compromise. Mason's voice snapped over the radio. Demo team, fall back to rally point. Overwatch, cover their withdrawal. The courtyard exploded with activity. Guards poured out of buildings, weapons ready but confused about where the threat was coming from. Elise and Vasquez began engaging systematically, picking targets with careful precision. Each shot had to count. They were 8 against an unknown force, and ammunition wasn't infinite. Elise dropped a guard who appeared in a second-story window. Vasquez took out 2 more who tried to flank toward Crawford's withdrawal route. The suppressed rifles kept the enemy guessing about their position, but that advantage wouldn't last. Rally point, 30 seconds, Mason reported. Overwatch, displace now. They grabbed their gear and moved, sliding backward down the hillside while maintaining eyes on the village. Behind them, the demolition charges detonated a massive double explosion that lit the night sky and sent a mushroom cloud of fire and debris billowing upward. The supply dump was gone, along with whatever enemy fighters hadn't escaped the blast radius. The team linked up at the rally point and began the long movement back toward friendly territory. But extraction proved harder than insertion. The enemy was alerted now, searching for them, radioing ahead to cut off possible escape routes. At dawn, with Charlie Company's lines still 3 kilometers distant, they ran into an ambush. The ambush site was a natural kill zone, a narrow valley with steep sides and limited cover. The enemy had chosen it well, catching Mason's team in the open just as full daylight arrived. Automatic weapons fire ripped through the morning air, bullets cracking past and kicking up dirt around the team. Everyone dove for what cover they could find: rocks, depressions in the ground, anything that might stop a bullet. Contact front, Crawford shouted, returning fire with controlled bursts. Multiple hostiles dug in positions. Elise scrambled behind a boulder, her ears ringing from the close rounds. Through gaps in the enemy fire, she caught glimpses of muzzle flashes from fortified positions on both sides of the valley. A proper ambush, coordinated and deadly. We're pinned, Mason said, his voice tight with controlled anger. They've got us in a goddamn vice. Anyone got eyes on their command element? Elise raised her head carefully, scanning through her scope. The enemy had the high ground and superior firepower, but they'd made one mistake. Their commander had positioned himself on an exposed ridgeline, directing fire from a position where he could observe the entire kill zone. "I've got what looks like their leader," she reported. "Ridgeline, 11 o'clock, range approximately 2,100 meters. "That's an impossible shot," Vasquez said flatly. He was pressed against cover 10 meters away, blood running from a graze wound on his shoulder. "Extreme range, uphill angle, wind." "I can make it," Elise interrupted. Mason looked at her, then at the enemy fire tearing through their position, then back at her. "If you miss, you're giving away our only precision asset. They'll target you specifically. If I don't try, we're all dead anyway, sir. That commander is coordinating this ambush. Drop him, and their fire discipline falls apart." It was a gamble. Everything about the shot was wrong. The range pushed the limits of her rifle's capability. The angle would affect her ballistics calculations, and she was cold, scared, and running on adrenaline instead of the calm focus she needed for precision shooting. But Mason was right. They were pinned down in a kill zone. Without something to break the stalemate, the enemy would methodically pick them apart or simply wait for reinforcements to arrive. "Take the shot," Mason ordered. Elise found a firing position between two rocks that gave her a stable platform and limited exposure. She extended her rifle's bipod, settling the weapon into a solid stance. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander, clearly an older man with a gray beard, gesturing to his fighters, directing their fire. 2,100 meters, more than twice the distance of her previous longest shot. She ran the calculations in her head. Bullet drop at this range would be massive, requiring extreme elevation adjustment. Wind was gusting from the east, maybe 8 to 10 miles per hour. Temperature had risen to around 40 degrees. The uphill angle would affect her point of impact. Her hands moved automatically, adjusting her elevation and windage turrets based on experience and training and intuition. At this range, the bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, in eternity where anything could go wrong. Staff Sergeant Crawford crawled over beside her. "I'll spot for you. Call your corrections." She gave him her calculations. He verified them against his own assessment, made a small suggestion about the thermal rise affecting the bullet's path. She incorporated his input and resettled her aim. The enemy commander was still visible, still coordinating. He hadn't yet realized he was being targeted. Elise's breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope. She could hear her heartbeat, feel each pulse in her fingertips where they touched the rifle. The chaos of the firefight faded to background noise. She found the natural pause between heartbeats. She pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled. Through the scope, she tracked the bullet's impossible arc across the valley, watched it fight gravity and wind and distance. The enemy commander stood frozen in her crosshairs for what seemed like forever. Then he jerked backward and disappeared from view. "Hit," Crawford confirmed, his voice filled with disbelief. "You actually hit him. Target down, 2,000 meters plus." The effect on the ambush was immediate and dramatic. Without their commander's direction, the enemy fire became sporadic and disorganized. Fighters on the hillside started looking around in confusion, trying to understand where the shot had come from, whether they were now being targeted by their own side. "Assault through," Mason shouted. "Move, move, move." The team broke from cover and charged the ambush position, using the enemy's confusion to close the distance. Elise provided covering fire, dropping 2 more hostiles who tried to rally their comrades. Vasquez was beside her, shooting steadily despite his wounded shoulder. Within minutes, it was over. The ambush collapsed, enemy fighters abandoning their positions and fleeing into the hills. Mason's team secured the high ground and began consolidating while setting security. "Casualties?" Mason called out. "Vasquez is hit. Superficial," Crawford reported. "Martinez has a leg wound, can walk. Everyone else minor cuts and bruises." "Hart, get up here," Mason ordered. She approached warily, uncertain what to expect. Mason was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between respect and something like awe. "That was a hell of a shot, Corporal," he said quietly. "Maybe the best I've ever seen. You just saved this team." "Just doing my job, sir." "No," he shook his head. "That was beyond your job. That was extraordinary." Around them, the other team members were staring at her too. Crawford nodded slowly. Vasquez, despite his wound, gave her a tired thumbs up. Even the infantry specialists who'd ignored her until now looked at her differently. "We need to move before they regroup," Mason continued. But when we get back, I'm putting you in for a commendation. And next time I need precision fire, you're first on my list." "Yes, sir." They made it back to Charlie Company's lines by mid-morning, exhausted and battered but alive. Word of the long-distance shot had already spread, somehow radio chatter, probably picked up by monitoring stations and passed along the informal network that connected all forward positions. By nightfall, the entire battalion knew about Corporal Elise Hart and her impossible shot. The nickname Lynx had evolved into something more, the Phantom Lynx, the unseen hunter who struck from impossible distances. She tried to downplay it, uncomfortable with the attention. But the respect she'd been chasing, the acceptance she'd fought so hard to earn, it was finally, undeniably hers. The week following the ambush brought a shift in how Charlie Company treated Elise. Not dramatic, not loud, but unmistakable. Soldiers who'd previously avoided her now nodded when she passed. Conversations didn't stop when she approached. Sergeant Bowman started including her in tactical planning sessions without hesitation. The change was subtle but profound. Lieutenant Davis called her to the command post 3 days after the mission. Lieutenant Colonel Mason was there, along with the battalion command sergeant major, a intimidating figure named Rodriguez who'd spent 30 years in the infantry. "Corporal Hart," Mason began formally, "I'm pleased to inform you that your actions during the direct action mission have been recognized at the battalion level. I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor device." Elise stood speechless. The Bronze Star was a significant award, not handed out casually. More importantly, Mason continued, "I'm requesting that you be reassigned to Battalion Reconnaissance Platoon as a designated marksman. They need someone with your skill set, and frankly, you're wasted doing standard infantry work." It was a promotion in all but rank. Recon Platoon operated with more autonomy, handled more complex missions, and was generally considered the elite element within the battalion. She struggled to find words. "I'd be honored, sir, but Charlie Company has been my home since deployment. These soldiers will be fine." Davis interrupted, though not unkindly. "Hart, you've proven yourself 10 times over. No one here doubts your competence anymore, but you have skills that can save lives at the battalion level. That's where you need to be." Command Sergeant Major Rodriguez spoke for the first time. "Corporal, I've been in this man's army for longer than you've been alive. I've seen maybe a dozen soldiers who had that combination of technical skill, tactical awareness, and raw courage you demonstrated last week. Don't waste it by staying in a line company out of misplaced loyalty." When she left the command post an hour later, the decision had been made. She'd transferred a recon platoon within the week, pending final approvals from higher headquarters. Her last night with Charlie Company, they held an informal gathering, no alcohol in the field, but plenty of bad coffee and shared stories. Sergeant Bowman approached her during a quiet moment, looking uncomfortable with whatever he was about to say. "Hart," he started, then stopped. "Tried again. Look, I gave you a hard time when you first got here. I didn't think. I had doubts about whether." He paused, frustrated with his own words. "It's okay, Sergeant," Elise said quietly. "I understand." "No, let me finish." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. You're one of the best soldiers I've ever served with, male or female. That shot you made, hell, most of us couldn't make that shot on our best day with perfect conditions. You did it while we were under fire, cold, scared, and exhausted. That's not just skill, that's character. I had good training." She deflected, uncomfortable with the praise. "Training helps, but what you did out there that came from here." He tapped his chest. "Heart, courage, whatever you want to call it. Point is, I'm proud to have served with you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." It was perhaps the most genuine thing anyone had said to her during the entire deployment. "Thank you, Sergeant," she managed. "That means more than you know." Private Thompson approached next, followed by Crawford, then Vasquez with his arms still in a sling. One by one, the soldiers of Charlie Company came to say goodbye, to thank her, to tell her she'd always have friends in 1st Platoon. Even soldiers who'd never spoken to her directly made a point of shaking her hand. Lieutenant Davis gave her a letter personal recommendation for officer candidate school, if she ever wanted to pursue it. "You've got the leadership skills," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." When dawn came, she packed her gear and prepared to move to her new assignment. Charlie Company was forming up for morning stand-to, the daily ritual of preparation and readiness that marked every sunrise in combat zones. As she walked past the company formation toward the waiting transport vehicle, Sergeant Bowman called the unit to attention. Then, unprompted and unofficial, the entire company saluted her. It wasn't regulation you didn't salute enlisted personnel, but sometimes respect transcended regulations. Elise returned the salute, blinking back unexpected tears. Then she turned and walked toward whatever came next, carrying the knowledge that she'd earned her place among warriors. The Phantom Lynx had arrived. 6 weeks later, Elise sat in a hide position 2 kilometers behind enemy lines, rain dripping steadily down her neck despite her weatherproof gear. Reconnaissance platoon had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days, an enemy logistics coordinator whose elimination would disrupt supply lines across the entire sector. Beside her, Sergeant First Class Mitchell, her new spotter and team leader, scanned the target building through his optics. Mitchell was a veteran of multiple deployments, respected throughout the battalion, and he'd welcomed her to recon platoon without hesitation or doubt. "Movement. Second floor window," Mitchell murmured. "Could be our guy." Elise adjusted her scope, compensating for the rain and wind. Through the glass, she could see a figure matching their target's description: right age, right build, right behavior patterns. "Range?" she asked. 1,347 meters. "Wind is your biggest variable, gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour, quartering from the northwest." She made her calculations, adjusting for the weather conditions and the slight downhill angle. At this range, with these conditions, the shot was challenging but makeable. Everything she'd trained for, everything she'd proven, came down to moments like this. "I have a shot," she reported over the radio. "Stand by," came the response from the mission commander, confirming target identification. They waited. Rain continued falling. The target moved away from the window, then returned with what looked like documents in his hands. He stood there, backlit, completely unaware. "Overwatch. You are cleared hot. Take the shot." Elise settled into her final aiming position. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed. Everything became simple. The rifle, the target, the moment between heartbeats. She fired. Through the scope, she watched the impossible arc of the bullet's flight, threading through rain and wind and distance until it found its target. The figure in the window jerked and fell from view. "Target down," Mitchell confirmed. "Clean hit. Let's move." They broke down their position and began the careful extraction back to friendly territory. As they moved through the darkness, Elise thought about how far she'd come from that first deployment with Charlie Company, from the doubts and mockery and constant pressure to prove herself. She'd become something more than just a good shot. She'd become a specialist, a professional, someone her fellow soldiers trusted with their lives. The nickname had spread beyond the battalion now. Intelligence analysts had picked up enemy radio chatter referring to the ghost shooter and the one who sees from nowhere. Other units requested her team specifically for high-risk missions. Senior leaders were talking about expanding the sniper program to include more women, using her success as evidence that gender mattered less than skill and determination. She didn't think of herself as a trailblazer or a symbol. She was just a soldier doing her job, taking the shots others couldn't or wouldn't take, keeping her teammates safe through precision and discipline. Back at base 3 hours later, as she cleaned her rifle and prepared her after-action report, her radio crackled to life. "Phantom Lynx, this is TOC. Be advised, we're tracking possible enemy counterattack forming on the northern ridge. Request your team move to Observation Post Delta to provide overwatch for 1st Battalion." Mitchell looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "You good for another mission? We've been in the field for 4 days. Elise considered. She was exhausted, cold, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep from the past 72 hours. Her body ached from the constant strain of movement and tension, but soldiers were counting on her. That was the job. That was what she'd signed up for. "I'm good," she said. "Let's move." 20 minutes later, they were loaded into a transport vehicle heading toward the observation post, carrying the tools of their trade rifles, optics, calculations, and the quiet confidence of professionals who'd proven themselves in the hardest possible ways. The legend of the Phantom Lynx continued to grow with each mission, each successful shot, each life saved by precision fire from impossible distances. But for Elise Hart, it was never about the legend or the recognition. It was about the moment of absolute stillness before the shot. The perfect marriage of skill and circumstance. The knowledge that when her teammates needed her most, she wouldn't let them down. One shot at a time, she was writing her story in the only language that mattered in combat: results. The vehicle bounced over rough terrain toward the new mission, and Elise checked her rifle one more time, making sure everything was ready. In the darkness, with rain still falling and danger waiting ahead, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This was where she belonged. This was who she'd become. The phantom Lynx, quiet and deadly, watching over her brothers and sisters in arms from distances they couldn't imagine, taking the impossible shots when everything depended on precision and courage. The legend was real, and it was just beginning.